separate events, but two sides of the same coin. When Paul informs the Corinthian Christians about the matters of first importance to the Christian faith, he begins with the announcement that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures. But then he quickly adds that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures. Both the cross and the resurrection are of first importance to the Christian faith. So, to complete the picture of Jesus' redemptive work, after exploring the crucified Christ in last week's lesson, we will focus our attention in this lesson on the risen Christ. Immigrants have long come to the United States in search of the American dream. Some come looking for prosperity and upward mobility, but most just seek the basic dream: a safe place to live, to work, and to raise a family. In our lesson text, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary go to visit Jesus' tomb, probably just hoping to find the basics: their teacher and friend's body in a safe place where they can mourn him. But they find much more than that. God has done something that goes far beyond their expectations, and what God has done gives them and us our purpose in life. Most scholars agree that both Matthew and Luke use the Gospel of Mark as a source. In his empty tomb narrative, Matthew follows Mark's outline but adds touches of his own. Last Sunday's April 5th lesson text ended with Jesus' death and the accompanying events, climaxed by the Roman soldier's declaration, "Truly, this man was God's son." Matthew then follows Mark in reporting that some of the women who followed Jesus were watching from a distance, and that Joseph of Arimathea requested and received permission to bury Jesus' body. The verses leading up to our lesson text are unique to Matthew. They report the religious leaders asking Pontius Pilate to secure Jesus' tomb so his disciples couldn't steal his body and then claim that Jesus had been raised from the dead. Pilate permits them to do so by posting soldiers at the tomb. So now let's go into the Bible. And we're going to read Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, titled Limited Expectations. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. The three synoptic sing together Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all report that women who followed Jesus were the first people to discover that his tomb was empty. They all say that Mary Magdalene was one of the women, but they have varying women accompany her. Women were generally not considered reliable witnesses in first century Israel, so their role as the first witnesses to the empty tomb underscores their indispensable role in testifying to Jesus' resurrection. God works through Christ to turn society upside down. We can't be sure who the other Mary is. Previously, Matthew refers to Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, who, along with Mary Magdalene and the mother of the sons of Zebedee, watched Jesus die. Matthew also reports that Jesus had brothers named Joseph and James, so the other Mary may be Jesus' mother. If so, why would Matthew not explicitly identify her as Jesus' mother? Maybe he wants to emphasize her relationship to Jesus as his disciple rather than as his mother. Matthew says the two women go to see the tomb. Mark and Luke say they take spices to prepare Jesus' body for burial. We can assume they are going to mourn and show their respect in the same way we would visit the graveside of a beloved friend or family member. It is the Sunday morning after Jesus died on Friday, so they are still grieving. Regardless of their reason for coming to the tomb, we can be sure that they do not expect what happens. Maybe they come with hope. Perhaps they come thinking maybe, just maybe, After all, Jesus had said he would be raised after his crucifixion. But they most likely come sad, angry, and scared, expecting only to grieve the loss of their teacher, leader, and friend. But they experience far more than they could ever imagine. Why do you think the two Marys go to the tomb? At the very least, they go there to pay their respects to Jesus and to mourn him. Some of us have probably visited loved ones' graves for this reason. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are visiting a loved one's grave. I want you to silently consider the following questions. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? Why did you decide to visit? Did you bring anything with you? What do you hope to experience? You can open your eyes now. The women in our lesson text probably have similar motives and expectations as they visit Jesus' tomb, but they don't expect what happens next. Let's go back into the Bible for an amazing fulfillment. This comes from Matthew, again, chapter 28, verses 2 through 6. I will read 2 through 4 first. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. Among the four Gospels, only Matthew has the stone still covering the tomb's opening when the women arrive. Matthew doesn't say how long the women have been at the tomb before things start happening. A great earthquake occurs, and an angel descends from heaven, rolls the stone away, and I love this part, and he sits on it. An earthquake also occurred when Jesus died. In Matthew's narrative, creation responds to Jesus' death and resurrection. The earth testifies to the significance of what God is doing through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Jesus seems to have already been raised before the angel removes the stone. In any event, the women don't see him at this point, but they do see the angel. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary have an awe-inspiring experience. The angel's appearance is dazzling. Melinda Quivik describes this moment by saying, "Light has split a crack in the universe, and everything we thought we knew is changed." The most important thing to ever happen has happened. The two women are about to receive the best news ever told. Things will never be the same. When Jesus died, the soldiers at the cross said that he is God's son, but the soldiers guarding Jesus' tomb became like dead men out of fear of the angel. This is ironic. The soldiers assigned to guard Jesus' dead body become like dead men, but the previously dead Jesus is now alive. The women aren't overcome by the awesomeness of this experience. They displayed relentless faithfulness by being present when he died, and they continue showing their faith by coming to the tomb. Now they don't look away as they see the world light up. They are faithful and present, and they become the first people to hear the greatest news of all time. I want you to close your eyes again. Let's imagine that you are one of the women at Jesus' tomb. Everything is still. You are lost in your grief and memories. Then the ground starts to shake. It's subtle at first, and then it gets stronger. You look around trying to determine what is going on. You look up to the sky, and as you do, your vision is blinded by the brightest white light you have ever experienced. You blink until things come into better focus. Open your eyes. What did you feel? What did you say? What are you thinking? An earthquake strikes after the women arrive at Jesus' tomb. An earthquake also occurred when Jesus died. What is the significance of these earthquakes? What do you think it means that they occur in conjunction with both the death and resurrection of Jesus? Matthew is the only gospel that says the stone still covers the tomb when the women arrive. They see the angel roll the stone away and sit on it. The angel's appearance brings light to the darkness and brightness to the gloom. Why do you think the guards became like dead men? Well, let's go back to the Bible and read verses 5 and 6. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay." None of the gospel writers try to describe Jesus' resurrection. What could they have said? One cannot describe the indescribable. The angel addresses the women. First, he tells them not to be afraid. They have already shown courage by not passing out as the guards did. Second, he announces Jesus' resurrection to them. And third, he tells them to come and see the place where he lay. Since Jesus has evidently already been raised, it seems that the angel has removed the stone to make it possible for the women to see into the now empty tomb. The guards seem to be scared nearly to death, and the angel tells the women not to be afraid, so they must have some fear too. How does the women's fear differ from that of the guards? Fear is a natural and understandable reaction to events surrounding Jesus' resurrection. We want to have the kind of fear that leads us to action rather than inaction. This is an ironic scene. The soldiers responsible for guarding Jesus' dead body become like dead men, but Jesus is alive. We began our lesson by talking about basic dreams for our lives for the church. God gave the two Marys an experience that made the fulfillment of much greater dreams possible. How are we responding to the possibilities that Jesus' resurrection opens up for us, individual Christians, as a church? Are we following the example of the guards or of the women? How can we live into the possibilities that God puts before us through our resurrected Lord? The women come to the tomb seeking to remember and honor the crucified Jesus. They find an empty grave. The angel invites them to see for themselves that Jesus is not in the tomb. He invites them to come and see. Next, he will tell them to go and tell. So let's go back one more time to the story in the Bible. In Matthew chapter 28, we're going to read verses 7 through 10, resurrection, fear, and joy. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings!" And they came to him and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. And then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." After the women have looked into the empty tomb, the angel instructs them to go and tell the other disciples what they have seen. The women are the first preachers of the gospel message. They don't turn away from the light when God shatters their expectations. By not allowing their fear to stop them, they take the first step in the mission to share the good news with all the earth. They become the catalyst for the movement that will change the course of human history in ways far beyond anything they could imagine. Now, earlier in his gospel, Matthew refers to Galilee as Galilee of the Gentiles. By sending the disciples to Galilee, the angel emphasizes that the gospel is for all nations, not just Israel. By promising the women that Jesus will meet the disciples there, the angel assures them that Jesus has not abandoned them, and he never will. They haven't seen him yet, but he is with them, and he will meet them in Galilee. The women head out in obedience to the angel's word, and they do so with fear and great joy. We can understand their lingering fear, even though the angel told them to not be afraid. They have just seen and heard an angel, after all. Who wouldn't be afraid after witnessing what the women have seen? But as Nelson Mandela said, courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Maybe their fear is more like awe now. Such fear is appropriate when resurrection confronts us. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary also experienced great joy. They haven't yet experienced the risen Jesus, but they have seen the empty tomb, and they have heard, and evidently believed, the angel's words. The events of Friday devastated them. The events of Sunday enlivened them with hope and with joy. The women are not only the first people to learn of and proclaim the resurrection, they are also the first to meet the risen Christ. They are on their way to share the angel's message with the disciples when Jesus comes to them. This communicates something important. We are responsible to go and tell even when we don't have full understanding. When we trust God's call, no matter how challenging, we can rest assured that Jesus will meet us on the way. Sometimes we must step out on faith before we receive assurance. The angel tells the women to go to tell the other disciples that Jesus has been raised from the dead and that they are to go to Galilee where Jesus will meet them. What do we make of the fact that Jesus appears to the women as they are on their way to carry out their mission? What does this teach us? When the two Marys see Jesus, they take hold of his feet and worship him. But Jesus tells them not to be afraid and repeats the angel's instructions to them. They are to go and tell. What does this say to us about what can happen when we are obedient to our call to share the good news of the resurrected Jesus? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, as Nelson Mandela said. How does this quote relate to the women's reaction to their experience and to the angel's instructions? How can we apply the quote to our calling to bear witness to the resurrected Jesus? Mary Magdalene and the other Mary are on their way to tell the disciples about the empty tomb and the angel's good news of the resurrection when they encounter Jesus. What does this mean for the church? How does it challenge our church? How should the fact that we serve a resurrected Lord affect our church's ministry? How can we become more open to who God wants us to be and to what God will empower us to do? The words fear and see recur throughout this narrative. We might conclude that seeing can produce fear. What Mary Magdalene and the other Mary saw at Jesus' tomb caused them to be afraid. Such a reaction is understandable when we encounter the unexpected and the unexplainable. The women experienced fear, but was it fright or was it reverence? Or maybe a little of both. This much we do know. Their fear didn't stop them from obeying the angel's command to go and tell what they had seen and heard. And as they went, they experienced the resurrected Jesus. The risen Christ sends us out to bear witness to him with our perspectives, our words, and our actions. How can we faithfully do this? Please pray with me. Risen Christ, we thank you for giving us courageous examples of faith. Help us to follow in their footsteps and not look away from opportunities you place in front of us, no matter how frightening they may be. Shake us up. Exceed our expectations. Make your church a conduit of resurrection power.